He has done all of these things that you would expect of kings. If we've said it once, we'll say it like 1 billion times. In the Old Testament, the king has 3 jobs. Okay? Which is why when you look at what people expected of Messiah, they expected 3 things. They expected him to be the one who establishes justice. Tell us how to do justice. Yehoshaphat does an amazing job of this. Jesus does this at the Sermon on the Mount, right? He says, how do we interpret the Torah? Interpret and apply the Torah. The second thing the king was supposed to do was establish pure worship. Establish pure worship. Why is it that Jeroboam, the king of the northern kingdom, gets ragged on so many times in the Bible? It's because instead of allowing the people to go to Jerusalem to worship the Lord in his temple, he sets up these Mick temples at Dan and Beersheba, where he personifies the Lord as a golden calf. Hint, the Lord is not a golden calf. So when does Jesus establish pure worship? Think about him getting into the temple and getting real angry, and he ties up this whip of cords, and he starts flogging people, saying, my house is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers, right? He's trying to purify worship. Jesus is always speaking about how the Lord is going to destroy the temple, and he's going to raise up this community that will worship him, not on this mountain, but in spirit and in truth. This is part of Jesus' royal function. He's functioning as king. But in chapter 20, Yehoshaphat is going to hit a major test. A major test. Because the third function of a king is bring the nation together to fight its enemies. And this was actually the most important function of a king. How good are you at fighting the nation's enemies? This is the one, by the way, that kind of offends people about Jesus' life. They're like, where's the military revolution, Jesus, right? Why are the Romans still in power? What are you even doing? This is why when Jesus starts getting a lot of recognition as Messiah, they're parading him into, you might say they're giving him a triumph into Jerusalem. And because they're waiting for him to say, okay, you're king, right? Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. Come fight the Romans now. And Jesus isn't interested in fighting the Romans. But here, Yehoshaphat hits his biggest test. And that is, he has established justice. He's put together pure worship. He's doing great. Now, about fighting the nation's enemies. In his first attempt, he allied together with the king of Edom, who is a pagan. We know from archaeology that Edom was worshiping pagan gods by this time in history. They started out worshiping Yahweh. They did not end that way. I'm trying to think. I think their god was named Kus or something like that. We know this from archaeology, not from the Bible. But Edom was pagan, and the other guy in this alliance was Ahab. And you might remember from last week that King Ahab went disguised into battle to try to escape from the word of the Lord, and doing it almost got Yehoshaphat killed. And except that someone disobeyed orders and shot an arrow randomly, and it hits Ahab in the joints of his armor, and he dies. And Yehoshaphat barely escapes back home to Jerusalem defeated. And when he gets home, a prophet tells him, yo man, you messed up. Why do you love the wicked? It's going to get you in trouble. And Yehoshaphat goes, I know. And you get here to this chapter. You get to take 2, okay? Can Yehoshaphat actually defeat an enemy? And in take 2, he finds himself wildly outnumbered. 3 neighboring peoples gang up against him. So 2 Chronicles 20, after this, the Moabites and Ammonites, and with them, some of the Meunites, came against Yehoshaphat for battle. Some men came and told Yehoshaphat, a great multitude is coming against you from Edom, from beyond the sea, and behold, they are at Hazazon Tamar, that is, En-Gedi. And Yehoshaphat was afraid, and set his face to seek the Lord, and proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. So he has 3 nations now ganging up against him: Moab, Ammon, Edom. All 3 of these nations are related to Israel, okay? These are not like the Philistines. The Philistines were like total foreigners. They were like Greeks living in the ancient Middle East. In fact, they were Greeks. Then you have these peoples who are related anciently to Israel, the children of Lot and the children of Esau. And when Israel came up from the land of Egypt, the Lord commanded Israel, do not attack these nations. And when they said, hey, can we pass through your land? They said, don't do it. And they were really angry, and Israel really wanted to fight them. Come at me, bro. And God said, no, you can't fight them. I've given them this land. And they said, okay. And they went the long way around. Okay? So the Lord had established these people, and now here they come against the land of Judah. And do you notice how Jehoshaphat, when he hears this news, he does not respond like, let's say, King David would have. King David is described in one place as being like a mama bear deprived of his cubs. Okay? People know if you mess with King David, you're going to find out. So and here in this passage, Jehoshaphat gets faced with this huge force. And the first thing it says about him was, he was afraid. He was afraid. If we feel fear in our Christian lives, oftentimes we feel like this makes us not a person of faith. You might see phrases like faith over fear, right? And it can easily seem to us that those 2 things are opposing forces. That to experience one is not to experience the other. If I am afraid, therefore I must be a person of doubt, right? In Jehoshaphat's case, we are going to see that this is not true. Jehoshaphat is freaking terrified when he sees an army coming up that he knows, he's done the math. He recognizes he cannot beat this force. Can't be done. In fact, if you're paying attention, this is the king of Edom coming to attack him 1 chapter after he just went into battle on the same side as the king of Edom. This is like a personal betrayal. Okay? And Jehoshaphat is feeling overwhelmed. There are going to be times in your life where you feel overwhelmed. The problems that are coming against you are more than you know how to deal with. And this is true both on an individual level, like, can I pay my bills? And on a corporate level, like, how do we as a church go forward? How do we reach our community? How do we care for those who are outside when we can barely, it seems, stay in touch and at peace with everyone inside? Just, Lord, how is this whole kingdom thing supposed to work anyway? He got the worship, he got the justice, but fighting his enemies. How is Jehoshaphat going to do it? Guy's just too darn nice, right? And yet, God provides a way for him. So it says that he was afraid. He set his face to seek the Lord and proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. Now, we don't like fasting, really. As Americans. Americans are not big into fasting. If we talk about fast and food, generally we're not talking about fasting from food. We're talking about getting fast food, right? So Americans are kind of about, there's an old saying, the business of America is business. We like having money. We like spending money. We like having things. And fasting is about intentional denial of us having things. But the purpose of it is to seek the face of God. It is to say, I'm going to give up what is visible for the sake of seeking him who is invisible. It's the choice of giving up what is good and enjoyable for the sake of seeking him who is better and perfect. Okay? So, I will say this. If you enter Army basic training, it will be one of the most intense and difficult experiences of your life. The vast majority of people will not recommend fasting. You know why? Because fasting involves a loss of strength. Right? I mean, imagine fasting going into running a marathon. It's like, do you want to die? Seriously. Fasting going into battle is not a brilliant strategy. You're like, what the heck are you doing, Yehoshaphat? Right? Is this why you have a hard time defending your people? Are you fasting going into battle? But Yehoshaphat has a reason for doing this. He says, look, if we carb up for this, if we bulk up for this battle, if we do everything in our power to just study all of the technical manuals and figure out the best tactics for fighting this foe, he goes, I might do okay, but I'm not going to win. I'm too far behind. The enemy force is too big. It would take a miracle to defeat this enemy. Sometimes the Lord will put us into impossible positions. He will put us into impossible positions. There is a misapplication that often gets passed around of a certain verse in the book of James. You guys know I love the book of James. In James, it says that whenever we face temptation, the Lord always gives us a way of escape. But he's talking about facing temptation, okay? He's saying like he'll never put you in a position where you must sin. But oftentimes this gets misapplied to be used to say the Lord will never give you a situation that will never give you a situation which is too much for you to bear. If that verse really meant that, you'd have to be like, well, then what's up with the book of Job? Right? Because Job does not bear all of the stuff that's upon him. Job just kind of collapses. But he says, I would rather collapse than curse God. Right? That's why Job is held up. There are times, says Paul, in is it 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians? I think it's 2 Corinthians. He says that I don't want you guys to be unaware of what happened to us in the province of Asia. He means Ephesus. That what we experienced there was way more than we could possibly bear. He said, in fact, we despaired even of life. We all thought we were going to die. But this happened to us that we might trust in the Lord who raises the dead. There are times where the Lord will let you experience burnout and frustration and depression and all sorts of insanity, not because he wants you to be destroyed, but because he wants you to experience him as the Lord who gives miracles, as the Lord who raises the dead. That when we reach the end of our capacity, we learn to come to him for capacity. And here is where Yehoshaphat is. He can't possibly be a good enough warrior to win this battle. So he goes the other direction. He chooses to fast. And Judah assembled to seek help from Yahweh. From all the cities of Judah they came to seek Yahweh. And Yehoshaphat stood in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of Yahweh before the new court and said, O Yahweh, God of our fathers, are you not God in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. In your hand are power and might, so that none is able to withstand you. Did you not, our God, drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham your friend? And they have lived in it and built for you in it a sanctuary for your name, saying, if disaster comes upon us, the sword, judgment, or pestilence, or famine, we will stand before this house and before you, for your name is in this house, and cry out to you in our affliction, and you will hear and save. So in other words, he's saying, hey, Lord, you brought us into this land. You gave us this house, the temple. We asked you, hey, Lord, if we call out to you in the time of disaster, will you hear us here? And you said yes. He is referring back to when Solomon dedicated the temple and Solomon's prayer and the Lord's response. So he's taking what the Lord has promised in the past and he's applying it. Remembering, as we might have said at retreat, right? And this is kind of a big deal because when he finds himself overwhelmed, he goes back to what he knows the Lord has promised him. If you ever find yourself in a position where you have no money, okay, it's worth it to go through the Bible and go to all of the passages where those who are righteous are promised that the Lord will supply all they need. And having these promises means that we can go back to them and remind God of them, that we can commemorate these things before his sight. If we are in a position where we're just like, we feel awful about who we are, if you're like, oh man, I'm such a horrible person, and after all these years of following Jesus, I still suck this much. We can go to somewhere like 1 John and say, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And we can bring these things to God and say, hey, can you cleanse me, please, like you promised? We can bring all these past things back before the Lord and take them to him. And that's what Yehoshaphat is doing. He's doing precisely that. And now, behold, he's describing the present problem. The men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, whom you would not let Israel invade when they came from the land of Egypt, and whom they avoided and did not destroy, behold, they reward us by coming to drive us out of our possession, which you have given us to inherit. O our God, will you not execute judgment on them? For we are powerless against this great horde that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. Blessed is the man, blessed is the woman, who is able to pray, Lord, I do not know what to do, but my eyes are on you. If I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to look to you. I'm not going to start playing Minecraft. I'm not going to doom scroll. I'm not going to find some other way of dealing with what the chaos going on in my heart. Can't escape from the storm inside of me, right? What did Elsa really need to do? Lord, I don't know what to do, but my eyes are on you. And if you look to him, that's when salvation comes. That's when real miracles appear. When we keep our eyes fixed on him. Fasting is a terrible way to win a battle. It's a really good way to get into the presence of God. Yehoshaphat knows he can't win the battle. He needs Yahweh to do that. And so he knows where to turn. So, meanwhile, it says, all Judah stood before Yahweh with their little ones, their wives, and their children. You know who those are? It's the people who can't fight. Send your kids out to a battlefield, won't go so well, right? Sorry, every action movie in 2025, women really did not put on armor and go out to fight in the ancient world. It just was not a thing. When it did happen, people wrote about it because it was so rare. Okay? Yes, historically there are examples of people who did it. But boy, were they unusual. But what are they doing? They're going to war. They're not going to war by putting on armor and stepping up to the battlefield. The kids and the women are going to battle by standing before the presence of the Lord. Where is this battle going to be won? Not on the battlefield. This is kind of a big deal. When you are 12, you're too young to go into long-term missions. Unless your parents do. In which case, hey, you're kind of along for the ride, right? At 12 years old, there are a lot of things you're not going to be able to do. You can't say, hey, I'm going to get to Bible study on my own by driving for like an hour on a rainy night. If you're going to do it, you're probably taking the bus. Okay? there are limitations about the stuff we can accomplish. But what there are never limitations is, can I worship the Lord? Can I pray to the Lord? And the joy of understanding what it is that worship and prayer do is that it's something we're never restricted from. It's something we're never restricted from. If you are locked away in solitary confinement and you're being kept in a prison cell away from all other people, and you're trying with all your might to hold on to your own mind, and you say, man, I can't do anything with the rest of my life, that too is a lie from the evil one. Because there's something you can do. You can pray for somebody. You can worship the Lord. And when we begin to do that, we will find that we are not alone, but that all of the holy ones who have come before us, the saints and the angels, are there with us wherever we are. As soon as we worship, as soon as we pray. So there is this, so when we do this, we are not just, when we come before the Lord and Alden's on the keyboard and we have, I wish I'd been paying more attention to who was standing where, but we have, Jeff over there, and when we have this kind of arrangement, right, it's easy for us, especially because it's familiar faces, it's people we know, it's songs we have sang before, it's easy for us to underestimate what's going on. It's very easy for us to underestimate what's going on. Very similarly to how, like, if you learned how to play piano from your parents, you may underestimate how good they are. And then you may need, or overestimate, but once you have that outside perspective where other people start to talk to you about your parents, you're like, yo, okay, I think I understand better now. Because sometimes you need to see the people who are close to you through somebody else's eyes. When we come together and we worship, okay, we are not just singing songs. This is not Christian karaoke. What we are doing when we're coming together is fighting a battle. We are the running water, which is going through the cave of our society and slowly forming more crystal formations, slowly carving out the stalactites and stalagmites. And the thing about that running water is, it's not real dramatic looking when you first see it. There are times where we'll get into the presence of God and we'll start worshiping, and just like the Holy Spirit falls in power and people start getting healed and people start crying and all sorts of other stuff can start happening. That there are times when that happens, okay? But there are lots of other times where we come and we just kind of have a normal service. And the worship team sings, and afterwards they're like, oh man, I played like a B flat when it should have been a B flat minor. I probably just said something nonsensical because I don't know enough music theory to know what I'm talking about. But they start getting into like the specifics of what they did wrong. And it's easy for us to look at ourselves and view ourselves that way. But if we talk that way, it's easy for us to miss the most important things that are happening. A priest who sacrifices to the Lord doesn't say, LOL, did you see how I was supposed to cut the carotid, and I cut both the carotid and the jugular? No, they would say, I sacrificed, this bull got sacrificed to the Lord, right? If the bull was dead and God got it, cool. If we worship God, our worship is not evaluated on the technical perfection of our playing. And thank God we are not evaluated on the technical perfection of the congregation singing. The measure of effective worship is God pleased? Did we open a portal to heaven? Did we get in touch with him? Did our hearts meet his heart? This thing we're doing right now, it's called a service, right? Who is being served in this service? It's him. He is the customer. We are all waiters. We wait for you. Yeah, not that kind of waiting, but you get the idea. We are the ones who are presenting the gift of our offering, the gift of our worship to God, and he comes and he meets us in the midst of that. As Israel comes before him and they stand up and they worship together and they fast together, it says the Spirit of Yahweh came upon Yahaziel, the son of Zechariah, and he gives his whole genealogy. But he's a Levite of the sons of Asaph. So in other words, one of the musicians stands up and he begins to prophesy. And he says, "Listen, all Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem and King Yehoshaphat. Thus says Yahweh to you, do not be afraid and do not be dismayed at this great horde, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow go down against them. Behold, they will come by the ascent of Ziz. You will find them at the end of the valley, east of the wilderness of Yeruel. You will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of Yahweh on your behalf, O Judah and Jerusalem. Do not be afraid and do not be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, and Yahweh will be with you." So he gives specific instructions and then tells them, go down to battle, but you won't have to fight. Go down to battle, you won't have to fight. Does Yehoshaphat win this battle by doing nothing? No. He does something. But you'll notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't fight. This battle is won and is won in a real way by Yehoshaphat. Not through fighting on a battlefield, not through sword or spear or mace. He wins this battle by coming into Yahweh's presence and then obeying Yahweh's commands. He trusts Yahweh enough to follow his instructions. He says, line up for battle, do it over here, they're going to come over there, but don't attack them. If Yehoshaphat attacks his enemy, what happens? Battle is joined, Israelites die, maybe they all die. But he receives these specific instructions, and what ends up actually happening is that this army of three nations actually ends up turning against itself. The men of Moab and Ammon attack the Edomites, and the Edomites fight them, and they end up weakening each other, and then the Moabites and the Ammonites attack each other until the whole army is destroyed. It's this incredibly wild, utterly improbable situation. Then Yehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, Yahweh. And the Levites of the Kohathites and the Korahites stood up to praise Yahweh, the God of Israel, with a very loud voice. And Yehoshaphat speaks up and says, "Believe in Yahweh your God, and you will be established. Believe his prophets, and you will succeed." And they set up this worship team to pray and give thanks. And as they pray and give thanks, their enemies are destroyed. They go into this kind of like civil war sort of thing, and Yehoshaphat finds himself out of it. So verse 24, when Judah came to the watchtower of the wilderness, they looked toward the horde, and behold, there were dead bodies lying on the ground. None had escaped. When Yehoshaphat and his people's clothing and precious things, which they took for themselves until they could carry no more. They were 3 days in taking the spoil, it was so much. On the 4th day, they assembled in the valley of Baracha, for there they blessed the Lord. Therefore, the name of that place has been called the valley of Baracha to this day. Then they returned, meaning the valley of blessing. Then they returned, every man of Judah and Jerusalem, and Yehoshaphat at their head, returning to Jerusalem with joy, for Yahweh had made them rejoice over their enemies. They came to Jerusalem with harps and lyres and trumpets to the house of Yahweh. And the fear of God came on all the kingdoms of the countries when they heard that Yahweh had fought against the enemies of Israel. So the realm of Yehoshaphat was quiet, for his God gave him rest all around. The purpose of Israel through the Old Testament, when you said, what was Israel supposed to do? Like, what was their goal? They were supposed to show the whole world that Yahweh was king over all the earth. They were supposed to show that having him as king was better than any of the gods of the other nations. The other nations were supposed to be drawn in to worship Yahweh themselves. That was the point. So one of the ways you see a successful king is that they'll start to say, people from the other countries stood up and took notice. When Yehoshaphat does this, this is the most Christ-like he's going to be at any point of his life. Okay? He has said, Lord, I am totally submitted to your will. May your work be accomplished in my life. And he does it. He has this tremendous faith. He sees this incredible miracle. The Lord delivers Judah. And all of the surrounding nations hear it, and they go, yo, Yahweh, that God's pretty hot. And he starts trending, right, on Moabite social media. So you have this incredible moment. Everything seems like it's going to be great. The whole world is fine dandy. You would say, wow, this Yehoshaphat guy, man, this is such an expert in faith. Was he always an expert in faith? I mean, we're almost trained at this point to say no, right? Because we know that the Bible doesn't like telling us these glowing stories about these people and then not telling us about their flaws. Which, by the way, if you read the holy books of other religions, they never do that. Just saying. You read like a Hindu holy story or a Buddhist holy story, all of their heroes are perfect. And like almost comic book perfect, like Superman perfect. In this great moment of triumph, when Yehoshaphat is reaching the end of his life, all of the nations have heard about this great victory they've accomplished through his worship, through his crying out to Yahweh. And Yahweh is on the tip of everyone's lips. Yehoshaphat has an idea. He's going to send ships to Tarshish. Now, Tarshish is one of those places that you probably couldn't find on a map. A lot of people think it's Spain. Some other people think it's the other way in Sri Lanka, but it's the point is it's probably Spain. Most people think that the main reason why Tarshish gets brought up when it does is that it's one of the corners of the world. Okay? And there are places like that in the Bible where it's important to know when this place gets brought up, it means the furthest edges of the earth. When they talk about Ethiopia, Ethiopia is like the southern edge of the world to an ancient person. Well, Tarshish is the western edge of the world. When you say all the nations will hear about Yahweh, Tarshish is going to come up. Okay? Whether in a good way, like Solomon's ships going to Tarshish, or in a bad way, like Jonah trying to flee there to get away from Nineveh. Yehoshaphat has this great idea that he's going to send ships to Tarshish, to trade with Tarshish. And you can tell they're going to bring the worship of Yahweh there. Except that he says, how do I finance this? One of the great questions of history, right? How do I finance this? And he says, well, what if I worked with the king of Israel? So the Lord straightens you out like 10 times, and it almost gets you killed, and you go, Lord, will I text and drive, right? Next week, when your phone goes, ba-ding, and you're like, oh,